I wrote a piece about it in Foreign Affairs to document this. The goal at that point was to try to make the relationship more normal, to deal with a whole series of problems that had been built up over 25 years of no communication, no trade, no investment. And of course, the key issue on the minds of both the Chinese and the Americans was Taiwan. And Zhou Enlai, who was the premier of China, who was their negotiator, and Henry Kissinger, who was Nixon's negotiator, and both formidable people on their own, decided they would need some compromise language. And the Shanghai Declaration, that still is the centerpiece of China-U.S. relations on that issue, was worked out between the two of them. And that opened the way to a building up of confidence. And then after that, we came up with a few economic issues that we can use to normalize relations, to increase trade incrementally. And it built from there. But it was trust and confidence and precise planning that were critical to this, and trust.
Which, of course, the Trump administration is wonderful at. Just because of time, and Paul wants to get in here with some real questions, I've got to ask you this. President Xi seems to venerate the pre-Zhou Enlai China. He wants to go back to Mao. He wants to go back to a more rigid, tougher China. When you see the turmoil with their defense leaders, their generals, their admirals, when you see just the clock ticking, is there any chance President Xi can pull back and become more like the China Robert Hormats knew?
Well, I think I know him quite well because I've worked with him since he was the party secretary in Zhejiang province, which was in the 90s. He's a very methodical person, and he does sort of venerate Mao, but he also realizes Mao had a number of issues that made him controversial. But there are two parts of the Mao background that are extremely important to understand. Mao made one point that we've been bullied by the foreigners over the last 100 years, and we're not going to be bullied again. And Xi is very much of the view that that must be a critical part of China's strategy, to be invulnerable to bullying or pressure or leverage by the foreigners. The second is that Mao understood, and Xi understands, that the fall of the Soviet Union was in part because they did not have a lot of trading partners. They were confined to a very few products that they produced and a very few countries to sell them to. And Xi Jinping was going to make sure that China had a broad range of trading partners and had a very diversified economy, and therefore could not be leveraged by the United States or anyone else. Those were really two key points that he draws from the Mao period and the fall of the Soviet Union. And let me make one other point that follows up your point, Tom, and that is, if we learned anything from this summit, it is that for the first time in nearly 100 years, the U.S. has a peer competitor on military issues, political issues, technology issues, and economic issues, and a peer both in scale and in skill. We have, if we didn't know that before, we know it now.
And Paul, David Weston had a brilliant insight, I think it was yesterday or the day before, on how we're back in the time of Robert Hormats, and there's a whole new China out there as well. There is.
So, Bob, what is some of your takeaways, or what are some of your takeaways from this President Trump, President Xi? I guess we call it a summit here. I'm not sure what was really accomplished, but what are your takeaways?
Well, my takeaway is that Trump came to understand that China is a peer competitor, unlike any we have seen for, as I say, nearly 100 years. The second is that China does business, negotiates in a very different way. Trump came in with a great deal of flattery of Xi. Chinese do not necessarily take the flattery. And Xi came in with a very crisp agenda, and was particularly crisp on Taiwan. And I think it was because he had picked up, and the Chinese authorities had picked up, that there was a lot of pressure in Washington on Trump to, in effect, give away a little bit on Taiwan, to move closer to the Chinese position on Taiwan. but also, so the people in Washington wanted a statement or something that was clear that said we would toughen up our support for Taiwan.
Right.
And Xi wanted to make sure that that issue did not arise and that the United States did not use this summit to make any statements that were pro-Taiwan or gave Taiwan additional power in terms of at least verbal support from the United States. Xi wanted to avoid that.
Right.
That's why he made the statement very early on, don't mess around with Taiwan.
Yeah, the first two readouts of the first day were very different. President Trump brought a plane load of American CEOs over to Beijing here. Do you think Beijing wants to do business with the U.S., with the West here?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that they realize that they have a need. They see a lot of companies looking for new supply chains, diversifying away from China.
Yep.
They want to make sure that that does not continue.
Right.
And therefore, I think it was smart to bring those CEOs. And every one of them has the potential to make a deal
Right.
that can actually enhance our capability and maybe theirs. The problem is a lot of them encounter a lot of complex difficulties on regulatory issues, intellectual property issues. So they had an
Come on,
opportunity
you're
to
killing
work
me.
with
Bob
those.
Hormats knows I'm going to interrupt here. So we brought over a boatload of billionaires. CEO, they're wearing, what's the shoes with the white soles?
Yeah.
They're all decked out in the Laura Piana shoes. Hormats wouldn't be called dead nose. We didn't take Nicholas Burns. We didn't take William Burns. We didn't take Robert Hormats. We didn't take the Detrius of James Baker out of Rice University. Can we rebuild your world, its state?
Not in the way we're doing it now. If you look at the number of diplomats who Trump took over relative to the number of CEOs he took over, the latter vastly outnumbered the former. And I think that China is a matter of building trust. And China trusts a few people who've worked on China. Not that they always agree with them, but there are several diplomats, and Nick Burns is certainly one. I think I'm another, and there are several others who have a long history with China. I think he would have done well to consult with those people and bring them over to show continuity with the China, the knowledgeable people about China from the past. Not necessarily that you agree with them, but that would be a way of doing
I got to run. Can we do a once a month thing with you? Can your people talk to my people?